Peace, everyone. This is Jackie Lukeman. Welcome to a special edition of Darker Than Blue. This is
I
an
think you're muted.
okay. All right, let's see. Am I muted? Yes, I think I am. I apologize. Welcome, everyone, to this special Black August commemoration of Darker Than Blue. Here in Darker Than Blue, where I, Jackie Lukeman, talk about socialism, struggle, and soul. Well, this month, I have been observing Black August like I do every August. And I want to start the show today with a special recording that was captured at the recent Curb Fest for Political Prisoners festival that the Black Alliance for Peace, Washington, D.C., had this past Saturday at the Black Workers and Wellness Center in Southeast DC. This clip is about 10 minutes long, but what we're talking about today, I think, is very well reflected in this clip, as well as the international connections that we have to not miss when we're talking about political prisoners and observing Black August and what it means for the struggle for liberation of not just our people here in the beating heart of imperialism, but for political prisoners and oppressed people struggling all around the world. So take a listen to this clip, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's see, are we having a problem loading up the clip? We might. Let's see it while we are trying to figure out what's going on with our audio here. Let's
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
a little bit about Black August. A lot of people may not know what Black August is, so let's talk about it. And I know all day long here on WPFW, where we are changing the world one broadcast at a time, and certainly today's broadcasting focusing on political prisoners is a part of that struggle for changing the world. So, what is a political prisoner? This is information that I'm happy to share with you from an organization called Curb Fest for Political Prisoners. This formation of revolutionaries whose mission it is to raise up the story, the struggle, the reality of the existence of political prisoners in the United States is not only a growing movement, but it is so incredibly important because they take the work that is being done by the Jericho movement here in the United States, and they are putting that information and that work into the hands of the communities that are the most impacted by this issue. And they're giving people in the communities the power and the information to raise this issue among their people. So, Curb Fest for Political Prisoners defines political prisoners as people jailed on charges related to their resistance to oppression and repression targeted by the state for their political beliefs and or actions. The contribution their resistance makes to revolution is the basis of their capture, regardless of the charges brought under the invalid racist laws of the US government. And they have an introduction to 28 political prisoners. There are more, but these are the ones that they have highlighted. And they have cards that have the information for each political prisoner on their website. You can find this information at curbfest.com/political prisoners. That's CURBFEST.com at political prisoners. So, who are some of these political prisoners that are highlighted in CurbFest, and what is CurbFest in particular? Well, it's kind of like a community street festival where you basically take over a street in your community and you have a festival, you have performers, you have music, you have food, and What you're really doing is educating the people in your community who walk by the festival and see the information on the tables and hear the music and maybe want to get some food. And while they're there, you teach people about political prisoners. And the really great part of Curb Fest is that you help people in your community write letters to the political prisoners, letting them know that they are not alone on the inside, that more people are becoming aware of their struggle, and that more people are here to struggle to free them. So, who are today's political prisoners? Well, let's look at some of the information that we have from CurbFest, some of the political prisoners whose profiles are being raised. Obviously, we have Mumia Abu Jamal, who once said, prison is a second by second assault on the soul, a day to day degradation of the self, an oppressive steel and brick umbrella that transforms seconds into hours and hours into days. Mumia was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in 1982 for the 1981 murder of Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner. Abu Jamal has become widely known while on death row for his writings and commentary on the criminal justice system in the US. Since 2011, Mumia was no longer on death row. Why? Because of the struggle of the people on the outside to free him. So while we were not able to free Mumia Abu Jamal at the time in 2011, we were able to get him moved off of death row. So since then, boxes of suppressed evidence have been found, discovered in a previously undisclosed and unknown location. And yet, Mumia Abu Jamal has not been granted a mistrial or a new trial, not even under the so called progressive prosecutor, Larry Krasner. Right? He suffered from hepatitis C and COVID-19, suffered diabetic shock, had congestive heart failure, recently underwent double bypass heart surgery, suffers from a chronic skin condition. And the only treatment for his health is freedom. Because we cannot trust the medical system inside the concentration camp of prisons to take care of the health of political prisoners because they don't want them healthy, they want them dead. So we have to continue to work to free Mumia Abu Jamal and other political prisoners, all of them, because they are all aging. Many of them are suffering the kind of health conditions that Brother Mumia is suffering, and they are not getting the kind of treatment they need because they are continually and perpetually being punished by the fascist state for daring to oppose the oppression of our people from that very state. But Mumia Abu Jamal is not the only political prisoner. We also have Sundiata Akoli, and these are just a few that I'm going to tell you about. Certainly not all, but some that you really need to know. Sundiata Akoli, former Black Panther, former member of the New African Party. He was captured in 1973 and given a life sentence. He was born in 1937 in Texas. He studied mathematics and became a computer programmer for NASA. In 1968, Sundiata joined the Black Panther Party. He was arrested in 1969. He had only been a member of the party for a year during a COINTELPRO raid on one of the Panther headquarters. After his release, he went underground with Assata Shakur and Zaid Malik Shakur. We never hear about Sundiata and Zaid when we talk about Assata. And when we talk about our sister Assata, we should never forget to mention Sundiata and Zaid. They were attacked by police, leaving Zaid dead. Assata was injured, and a New Jersey state trooper was dead. Sundiata was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years. His parole was rejected in 1992, 2004, and 2010. And at 84, and I think this is a little old, so he's older than that. I think he is closer to his 90s now. Akoli is the oldest of the former Black radicals still in prison. He has also contracted COVID-19 in FCI Cumberland in Maryland. He's struggling with chronic degeneration of his hearing, eyesight, mental, and muscular capacity, and suffering from gradual deterioration of his memory. Sundiata is appealing to the New Jersey Supreme Court, or he did in 2021. Yes, and so we know how that has turned out. How about Larry Hoover? And this is a very interesting story for me, knowing that Larry Hoover is a political prisoner. And just this past week, being in the same room, in the same proximity, next to and meeting people who are the former organization members with Larry Hoover and who see Larry Hoover and Chief Malik as their spiritual and ideological and organizational leaders. So, who is Larry Hoover? He's a former Black gangster from the Disciple Nation, from the Folks Nation, and the former and from the Growth and Development Organization, formerly the Gangster Disciples. So he was captured in 1974, Larry Hoover. He was born in Mississippi in 1950 and grew up in Chicago. He was a founder of the Black Gangster Disciples and later also led Folks Nation. After a turbulent early life, Hoover renounced crime and devoted his life to community organizing from prison. He set up a nonprofit organization that registered voters, started a music label that helped needy children, and organized a series of peaceful protests to fight the closing of public programs. In the early 90s, Hoover proclaimed that the initials GD, according to relating to his organization, no longer meant gangster disciples, but now it meant growth and development. And that is what the GDs are called today. Despite being a valued member of the Chicago community, Hoover was subjected to a 17-year undercover investigation while he was incarcerated. He was given 6 life sentences in 1985. And his son's voice is heard on Kanye West's song Donda. He was moved to a supermax in Colorado where he has been under a no human contact ban ever since. Larry Hoover has not had human contact ever since then. Another one of the current political prisoners who I was able to learn a lot more about this past week in Chicago after meeting with some of the members of his organization is Chief Abdullah Malik Kaba, or known as Jeff Fort. Jeff was a member of the Black P Rangers, the Blackstone Rangers, Maine 21, El Rukin Grassroots Independent Voters of Illinois. He was captured in 1987. Born in Mississippi, raised in Chicago, Malik Kaba co-founded the Blackstone Rangers gang. Through his work on the streets in his community, Kaba earned the nickname Angel for his ability to solve disputes. He organized 21 youth gangs into an organization known as the Maine 21, pushed their activities away from violence and toward community organizing and activism. In 1967, he founded the Grassroots Independent Voters of Illinois and received grants to teach gang members job skills. His work was recognized by President Nixon, although later Chief Malik renounced connections with the U.S. government and even walked out of a congressional hearing. In 1987, he was arrested on conspiracy charges and is currently serving an 80-year sentence. In 2006, he was moved to a supermax in Colorado. Yes, Chief Malik and Larry Hoover, I think, are in the same supermax prison in Colorado, where Chief Malik is serving an 80-year sentence. In 2006, he was moved to that supermax in Colorado, where he also has been under a no human contact ban ever since. And it's worth noting, my friends, that Chief Malik Kaba and Larry Hoover and Imam Jamil Alameen are comrades, are brothers, and they, even though Hoover and Chief Malik are under no human contact orders, they advocate for each other. Whenever they hear from their comrades on the outside and their comrades ask them, Chief Malik, what do you want us to do for you? Chief Malik will tell his comrades, I want you to work to free Larry Hoover. I want you to work to free Imam Alameen. And when they hear from Imam Alameen will tell them, I need you to work to free Larry Hoover. I need you to work to free Chief Malik. And when they hear from Larry Hoover, he says, I need you to free Chief Malik. I need you to free Imam Alameen. And these men are under no human contact orders, but they are still behind the walls, organizing the people to advocate and struggle for freeing other political prisoners. These are people who are behind the walls under the worst torturous conditions, inhumane, subhuman concentration camp type of conditions. And yet they continue to struggle for not just their liberation, my friends, but for the liberation of other political prisoners. I ask you, on this day, this commemoration of Black August in 2024, how can we on the outside, with a semblance of freedom that our brothers and sisters behind the wall do not have, how can we do less than what they are doing? And they have no rights, no protection, no safety behind the walls. There are no windows into their treatment other than the small reports that they can eke out to their friends and family in the outside world at great expense to them and to their families. Because you and I know that the mail is always intercepted by the prison authorities and read, mail going out and coming in. We all understand that when incarcerated people want to make phone calls to their family and friends on the outside, those phone calls are not charged at the kind of rates that we pay. No, those phone calls, and a lot of them are video calls, they are incredibly expensive. We're talking like 4 or 5, maybe more dollars a minute for a call from a prison to their family, to incarcerated people's family and friends on the outside. People on the inside can't afford that. And certainly their family on the outside cannot afford that. But as much as they can, people on the inside still do try to make collect calls to their families, and their families have to carry that burden. Even those on the outside who know little about political prisoners and who don't know any political prisoners, so we think. We can at least help the families of our people behind the walls. We can throw them a few dollars a month to help them afford contact with their people, afford these phone calls, afford these video calls, afford to send their people on the inside a little extra money to put on their books for their commissary so they can have a few things for comfort if they are allowed. And those of us on the outside also have to continually, perpetually, always be on the lookout for organizations like the Jericho movement and Curb Fest for political prisoners, who raise the alarm when a political prisoner is not receiving the critical medical care that they need. And we need to call into the prison, the warden's office, the governor's office, the Department of Corrections office in the states, and the federal Department of Corrections office, to let these people know, the folks who control this fascist gulag of a prison system in this country, to let them know that our people on inside the walls are not alone. You cannot torture our people inside the walls with no accountability, because we are watching you. This is what Black August is about. It is about raising the reality, exposing this aspect of this fascist system that punishes people who challenge the system, who struggle against this inhumane, capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist, settler colonial, patriarchal, xenophobic, transphobic, homophobic, ableist system, and punishes people who challenge this system in order that something better for all the people can be realized. The carceral state in this country exists to punish folks like us who know that there is something better than this system that exists for us, because better systems exist in other countries where true freedom actually does exist. We know this because of our decades long struggle for liberation and connecting this struggle with the struggle of people in places like Cuba and Vietnam and Venezuela and Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali, the anti colonial struggles on the continent of Africa, the anti imperialist struggles in the global south, and surely the struggle for liberation, freedom, and land in Palestine. For decades, Black radicals, socialists, communists, anarchists, environmentalists, anti war advocates, people of faith whose conscience compelled them to challenge this system of injustice in the tradition of Malcolm X, in the tradition of John Brown, in the tradition of Denmark Vesey, in the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr., in the tradition of Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, James Baldwin, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Robeson. This Black August commemoration, this struggle for the liberation of political prisoners, it is a part of this long struggle for liberation that all of our ancestors have taught us how to fight. And the political prisoners that we advocate for picked up the mantle and continued that fight. And we're not just talking about African political prisoners, because certainly we are lifting up the history connected to these people like Larry Hoover and Chief Malik and Mumia Abu Jamal and Sundiata Akoli and others who are locked up behind the walls, because the reason they're locked up behind the walls is this history that those of us who continue this struggle internalize, and it is a part of our DNA, and it is what makes us, it is what has compelled us to engage in the furtherance of this struggle, because we have recognized, because of our love and respect and honor for our people and our history, and this great struggle that we are engaged in for true liberation of all people, we recognize that they have called us to continue this struggle. So it's not just the members of the Black Panther Party and radical Black organizations and Black street gangs that turned into radical community organizations advocating for their people. But we're also talking about organizers who had no affiliation with any organization, who were fighting against injustice in this country, like the amazing Reverend Joy Powell. This is someone that a lot of people don't know anything about. And this is why lifting up the story of political prisoners is so incredibly important. Reverend Joy Powell is a community activist from Rochester, New York. She was captured in 2007. She is a pastor and a consistent advocate against police brutality, violence, and oppression in her community in Rochester. Reverend Powell was warned by the Rochester Police Department that she was a target. They told her they were targeting her because of her speaking out against corruption. And on many occasions from 1995 to 2006, Reverend Joy, which is what her community called her, had held rallies and spoke out against the police brutality in Rochester and police justifications for their brutality. In 2006, she was accused and convicted of first-degree burglary and assault. But remember, the Rochester police told her they were already targeting her. Joy is sure that the prosecution was politically motivated based on her activism through the organization that she started, Equality and Justice for All. This is a pastor now. An all white jury tried her in Rochester, New York. An all white jury in Rochester, New York. They had to work hard for that one. The state provided no evidence and no eyewitnesses for the alleged crimes that Reverend Joy committed. She was not allowed to discuss her activism or say that she was a pastor during her own trial. The person that testified for her was not allowed to tell the court that he knew Reverend Joy through her activist work and her church. Furthermore, Judge Francis Affronti promised he was going to give Reverend Joy a harsh sentence because he was biased against her. He was biased against a pastor advocating for justice. Hmm. While serving a 16-year sentence for the for the conviction, a cold murder case was then pinned on Reverend Joy while she was in prison. The trial for that cold murder case was fraught with misconduct, but she was convicted and then sentenced to 25 years to life. This is a story that a lot of people don't know anything about. A lot of people have not heard of Reverend Joy Powell, but here we have a Christian pastor moved by her convictions to fight for justice, to use her power and her position as a pastor to advocate and fight for her people. And what does the state do? Come along and tell her, we don't like what you're doing. We're targeting you. And they carried out their threat. There are also activists and advocates from other communities, like Chicano activists, like Byron Shane Chabuk. Let me find his card. Let me scroll up really quickly. Up we go. Here we go. Byron Shane Chabuk, also known as Oso Blanco. He is affiliated with Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, EZLN defender. He was captured in 1999. He is not scheduled to be released until, get this, 2071. He says the new Aztlan is now. We shall no longer kill Mother Earth and everything else just to have modern technologies. The time of that will end soon. We shall rise up as warriors, refusing to be slaves of commerce and political lies. In our own land, we shall be high master of the heart, high masters of consciousness. I am Oso Blanco de Aztlan. I support EZLN and the Brown Berets. Oso Blanco is an indigenous anarchist political prisoner of Wolf Clan Cherokee Choctaw heritage who has been imprisoned since 1999. He was first arrested in 99 for expropriating funds from 13 U.S. banks in New Mexico. Those funds, not U.S. banks' funds, they're the people's funds. So we're not mad at that. A year later, he liberated himself from a prison transport van. After his self-liberation, he continued to expropriate funds, the people's funds, from additional banks before ultimately being captured again. He expropriated an estimated $165,000 from U.S. banks and sent most of it back to Chiapas. And for that, for taking care of his people with money that he knew full well was stolen from the people in a land that was stolen from the people, he is serving a sentence that will not end until 2071. Well, how about also, let's see, Alvaro Luna Hernandez or Zinachtli. I'm sorry if I kind of butchered that a little bit. I did practice. But Alvaro Luna Hernandez is affiliated with the Chicano political movement. Alvaro Luna Hernandez is a political prisoner of the state of Texas and the U.S. government. He's nearly 35 years into a 50-year prison sentence for an aggravated assault, air quotes there, conviction stemming from a July 1996 incident in which he disarmed a Brewster County sheriff attempting to shoot him. So the sheriff was trying to shoot Comrade Hernandez, and Hernandez, not wanting to be shot, disarmed the sheriff, and he was charged with aggravated assault for defending himself. Alvaro vehemently denies the charge that he assaulted the sheriff. To Mexican Americans in the city, slums, plains, deserts, and prison cages of the Southwest, Alvaro is a civil rights hero, a Chicano freedom fighter, because he is true to his barrio roots and eternally fearless in the face of injustice. For years, he has been internationally recognized by amnesty movements and human rights lawyers and experts as a U.S. political prisoner, yet inside the United States, the name Alvaro Luna Hernandez remains largely elusive on the lips of progressives and social justice advocates until this moment, right now, today. Now you know about Alvaro Luna Hernandez, and you can lift up his name and his struggle, and you can even write to this comrade to let him know that you know about him, that you care about him, that you will support him in his struggle for liberation too. How about Bill Dunn? And let me go find his card. And these cards are all listed on the curbfest.com political prisoners website. Bill Dunn is a white man, and he is designated as a class war prisoner. I love it. He was captured in 1979. His release date is not until 2043. He says, I am a collectivist, long having recognized that in numbers there is strength and capability, and security and satisfaction. There is more humanity and cooperation than in isolation. With mutual struggle, we can forge the diverse elements of our side of the barricade into a powerful weapon against the depredations of imperial capital. Bill Dunn is an activist and collectivist who is serving 90 years in prison for aiding the successful escape of his comrade, Artie Ray Dufour, in 1979. Bill was arrested after Artie escaped and spent 7.5 years in the Supermax Marion prison for the attempted prison break. Bill remains active politically while in prison, where he works to help other prisoners get educated and writes for Struggle magazine. The magazine is called the number 4, Struggle, one word, For Struggle magazine. He organizes the annual Running Down the Walls 5K for political prisoners. Again, folks, he's behind the walls, will not get out for another 20 years, and he is organizing behind the walls. What can we do that is half of what he is doing? This. We must do the work, at least a little bit of what our brothers and sisters are doing behind the walls as they are being repressed, as they are being punished as political prisoners. Surely we can do half of what they do to work to free them, to work to spread their message, their name, their reputation, and to expand the struggle for justice for them and all political prisoners. Surely we can do that. And of course, there is Leonard Peltier, who we understand is our brother in struggle. He is our Baba. He is our elder. Leonard Peltier is an American Indian movement member, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Lakota Nations member. He was captured on February 6, 1972. He was given 2 life sentences. He was active in the American movement, American Indian movement. He's a member of the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, and Lakota Nations tribes. He was imprisoned in 1977 for the death of 2 FBI agents during a shootout at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. While he admitted to being present at the shooting, he did not kill the agents. And as we have been exposed to the release of documents from the Pine Ridge Reservation assault that have finally been released by the FBI. Even FBI agents who were involved in the assault and know about the case are now calling for the release of Leonard Peltier because the case against him was a lie. Even some FBI members and the former judge who sentenced Baba Leonard, even the judge is saying he needs to be released. So, in a trial rife with inconsistent evidence and recanted witness statements, Peltier was given 2 life sentences for the murders. The unfairness of his case has been globally recognized, and his appeals for clemency have been supported by civil rights activists that include Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Reverend Jesse Jackson, the 14th Dalai Lama. Well, yeah, we'll leave that one off to the side, and other folks. These are just a small sampling of all of the political prisoners that are focused on by Curbfest, by the Jericho movement, and they don't even track all of the political prisoners who exist, because people have an interesting belief that this country isn't producing more political prisoners. And those of us who are organizers, well, we know that's not true. Because particularly in this modern chapter of this liberation struggle, in the 2020 and subsequent uprisings in the streets against racist police terrorism, in the public, in response to the public lynchings of Mike Brown, of Tamir Rice, of Freddie Gray, of George Floyd, in all of those uprisings against those actions, those fascist actions by the fascist police forces deployed by the fascist law enforcement agencies and the fascist mayors of the cities through which they were deployed. More political prisoners were made. Political prisoners like our brother in Philadelphia, Anthony Smith, and his comrades, Khalif Miller, and others who were sentenced after the 2020 protest, uh, um, protesting the public execution of George Floyd. Anthony Smith acknowledged having helped some others flip over a vacant police car. No one was in the police car. The car wasn't on. It wasn't running. No one was getting into the police car. There was no threat to human life in what these people did. But Anthony Smith was sentenced to a year in prison, and others were sentenced to so much more in prison. Smith was sentenced to a year and a day, my correction, in prison, and as well as 2 years of probation, less than the 30 months or more than prosecutors wanted, and far less than terms meted out by the 2 co-defendants, because Khalif Miller was sentenced to 61 months in prison, and Carlos Machet was sentenced to 46 months in prison for flipping over an empty, non-running, just sitting there police car, literally for property damage. And the protest, again, was in response to the public lynching by the police of George Floyd. And certainly in Philadelphia, that protest was against the constant brutality and oppression of the Philadelphia police against the people in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a long history of racist, brutal police repression that has not abated, with the death of people like former police chief Rizzo, whose statue, if we recall, was taken down by protesters in Philadelphia a few years ago because of his very long and storied, infamous history of racist brutalization of Black and Chicano and indigenous people in Philadelphia, and poor white folks as well. Then there are people who were sentenced to years in prison in Baltimore for things like setting a trash can on fire, or allegedly setting a police car on fire, or jumping on top of a police car, sentenced to years in prison in Baltimore after the public execution and the uprising against that of Freddie Gray by the Baltimore Police Department. The same thing happened in Ferguson during the uprising against police brutality there. In Colorado. In every instance where people in this country took to the streets to challenge and resist the fascist repression of police, those very forces, along with the courts and the prosecutors and the legislators, judges, have helped in criminalizing the people who are standing up for justice against a fascist system. And this is important to understand, because as long as we continue to realize, as George Jackson told us in 1972, that fascism is already here, and that is what we are struggling against. We're not struggling against disconnected aspects of this system that we don't like, that don't work in this particular silo or in this particular instance. No, we're not talking about just policing that doesn't work in this system and the rest of the system is okay, so we need to reform policing. No, no. George Jackson made it very clear to us that the entire American system is a fascist system. And he said many things about this system that informs the struggle that we continue to carry on and advance, not just in defense of and for the liberation of political prisoners, of whom George Jackson was one, but also for all of our liberation. What George Jackson understood about fascism must be understood by us. So, what are some of the things that George Jackson has said about uh, fascism in particular that we need to be very clear on? Well, first of all, I have to tell you um, that he said in 1972, and this is literally my favorite quote from Blood in My Eye, which is a book that I do read at the beginning of every Black August. I read this book every single year. It is a small book. It is a perfect way, I believe, to kick off your Black August commemorations, your fasting, your training, your studying. I believe starting with the book that inspired Black August and the focus on political prisoners and the focus on this fascist system that creates and maintains the system of oppression of political prisoners. I think it's important that we start our commemoration and we end it with recognizing the work and the words of George Jackson. And my favorite quote from this book, Blood in My Eye, and it is a quote actually that my late husband Abdus and I literally lived and fell in love by. George Jackson said, "Settle your quarrels, come together, understand the reality of our situation, understand that fascism is already here, that people are already dying who could be saved, that generations more will live poor, butchered half lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done, discover your humanity and your love in revolution." So that is one fantastic quote, just a small quote from what George Jackson said about fascism, but he said so much more. And I want to wrap this hour up with just a few of the things George Jackson said when he was analyzing the US system of government, not just the carceral state, but particularly the carceral state, and how the maintaining of that carceral state, the US gulag, the US system of concentration camps, because that's what the prison system in this country is, what he said about fascism in the United States. George Jackson said in 1971, to call one or two or a dozen setbacks defeat is to overlook the ebbing and flowing process of revolution, coming closer to our calculations and then receding, but never standing still. If a thing isn't building, it must be decaying. As one force emerges, the opposite force must yield. As one advances, the other must retreat. There is a very significant difference between retreat and defeat. He says our real purpose is to redeem not merely ourselves, but the whole nation and the whole community of nations from colonial community economic repression. He says there have been 100 party lines on just exactly what fascism is, but both Marxists and non-Marxists agree on at least two of the general factors of fascism. One, its capitalist orientation, and two, its anti-labor, anti-class nature. These two factors, almost by themselves, identify the US as a fascist corporate state. Fascism is already here. And from behind the walls, George the Dragon Jackson explained to us why. He further said that we will not succeed until we fully accept the fact that the enemy is aware, determined, disguised, totalitarian, and mercilessly counter-revolutionary. To fight effectively, we must be aware of the fact that the enemy has consolidated through reformist machination the greatest community of self-interest that has ever existed. He said this in 1971 from in prison. Our insistence on military action, George Jackson says, and when he says our, he means the United States government, not collectively ours. But he says our insistence on military action, defensive and retaliatory, has nothing to do with romanticism or precipitous idealistic fervor. We want to be effective. We want to live. Our history teaches us that the successful liberation struggle, now he's talking about our struggle, require an armed people because we're dealing with a fascistic military state. An armed people, we need to be a whole people actively participating in the struggle for our liberty. He also says no one will fully comprehend the historical implications and strategy of fascist corporativism, except the true fascist manipulator or the researcher who is able to slash through the smoke screens and disguises the fascists set up. Fascism was the product of class struggle. It's an obvious extension of capitalism, a higher form of the old struggle, capitalism versus socialism. I think, George Jackson says, our failure to clearly isolate and define it may have something to do with our insistence on a full definition. In other words, and I love this so much, we are looking for exactly identical symptoms from nation to nation. We have been consistently misled by fascism's nationalistic trappings. We have failed to understand its basically international character. Fascism is an international, pan-European project. In fact, it has followed international socialism all around the globe to try to crush it. One of the most definite characteristics of fascism is its international quality. which is why those of us who struggle for liberation must also be internationally organized. And finally, I think this is a great quote to leave you with from George Jackson. At its core, he says, fascism is an economic rearrangement. It is international capitalism's response to the challenge of international scientific socialism. It developed from nation to nation out of differing levels of traditionalist capitalism's dilapidation. The common feature of all instances of fascism is the opposition of a weak socialist revolution. When the fascist arrangement begins to emerge in any of the independent nation states, it does so by default. It is simply an arrangement of an established capitalist economy, an attempt to renew, perpetuate, and legitimize that economy's rulers by circumflexing and weighing down, diffusing a revolutionary consciousness that is pushing from below. Fascism is the automatic response of the ruling class to the working class pushing for justice from below. So George Jackson says that fascism must be seen as an episodically logical stage in the socio-economic development of capitalism in a state of crisis. It is the result of a revolutionary thrust that was weak and miscarried, a consciousness that was compromised. He says when revolution fails, it is the fault of the vanguard parties. It is clear that class struggle is an ingredient of fascism. It follows that where fascism emerges and develops, the anti capitalist forces were weaker than the traditionalist forces. This weakness must become even more pronounced as fascism develops. The ultimate aim of fascism is the complete destruction of all revolutionary consciousness. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we are talking about not just the commemoration of Black August this year, the struggle to free political prisoners, the struggle to end this carceral state, and the struggle to build a people focused instead of a thing focused, a peace focused instead of a war focused, and a people centered human rights focused instead of an imperialist and capitalist focused society. In order for us to continue this struggle against this fascist system that creates and maintains political prisoners, we must be stronger in our organization, in our solidarity, in our movements, and in our actions and convictions. We must be stronger, more unified, more organized, and more internationally conscious than the forces of fascism that are fighting against us, because the only way we can defeat them is through the overpowering strength of the people. This is why I do what I do. This is why WPFW exists, to do what it does to change the world one broadcast at a time. This is why we will continue this struggle for freedom for political prisoners, the end to all political prisoners, the end to the carceral state, the end to fascism in this country, and the rebirth of a new world, a new society built on peace, people-centered human rights, justice, and international solidarity. I am Jacqueline Lukman. This has been Darker Than Blue on WPFW here in Washington, D.C., 89.3 FM, where we are changing the world one broadcast at a time. I will see you again tomorrow at 5 p.m. with an interview with Chairman Omali Yeshitela from the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru 3, and the trial of the Uhuru 3 tomorrow. Peace, everyone.